Welcome back. In a country where young people make up the majority of the population, the question of their role in shaping national policies and influencing governance structures has never been more urgent. Thus, the University of Namibia's Political Science Society held a powerful General Assembly debate under the theme Youth Participation in National Governance. Now, the event gathered sharp minds, passionate voices and critical perspectives from students, scholars and activists alike. I'm now joined by Evian Armando Pieters, Secretary General, and LapakaSheya Shapaka, Vice President at the University of Namibia Political Science Society, to help us unpack the key highlights and the way forward for youth involvement in Namibia's governance processes. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Nina. Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you so much for being here. Well, just to start with, I don't know, should I call you LapakaSheya or Shapaka or just Sheya?
You can call me Lapaka.
Lapaka, talk to us about to what extent, this debate really offered practical solutions for increasing youth participation in national governance beyond just the theoretical discussions.
Thank you so much, Nina, for that question. As the Vice President, of course, when we organized this event, we thought that this debate would really bridge the theory and the lived experiences. So this debate, in turn, really did live up to our expectations, because today, young people in the room really told us what they expect and their visions for the Namibia that they want. When we had this debate, we sort of wanted to evoke some sort of political consciousness, and it was quite a number of people that kept on holding us accountable as the leaders as well, and also our country's leaders. A young lady even challenged Armando and asked about youth in politics and how we can be the activists that we want to see in our generation.
Fantastic. Armando, you seem really revved up still from the debate, so please share your sentiments on how today went, and also what are the things that the young people said that they, are expecting?
Nina, we... in summary, we took the bull by its horn, if I am to put it as such. The discussion was quite frank. There was such truthful discussions that we had. And one thing that really stood out for me was that, as Lapaka said, we separated theory from reality. And we said, how can young people actively drive the architecture of our governance system in Namibia? And we said young people are being used to somewhat drive a narrative that our participation ends at the ballot. Well, the discussion dissolved to saying that we are shutting down that, we are dissolving that notion, and young people were empowered to play an active role beyond the ballot. And one thing that stood out was how fragmented we are as young people. There was a notion that came out, and it came out as performative participation or politics, if you'd rather. How we as young people were put to task by our constituents, and we were told that we play performative politics. When Armando stands up and says something, everyone in the room is clapping hands for Armando, while Armando's really not speaking substance. So we were also saying that young people need to learn to be critical and analytical. That's the only way that we can really drive and evoke change. When what our political leaders give us, that they say this is going to be the governance architecture for the next 5 years, how do we interrogate this? So this was what we unpacked as young people today.
So they were saying you need to walk the talk.
Walk the talk, yes.
Tell me, Armando, were diverse youth perspectives represented in this debate, including those from marginalized or underrepresented communities?
Yes, of course, Nina, the call was really indeed open. And one thing that really stood out for me was that in the room, we had representatives. We are a political science society. Unfortunately, we cannot shy away that we represent the voice of the young people that speak to governance, politics, etc. So when we send out invitations, of course, invited all our political societies that are represented at the university level. Of course, the call was open. We had a diverse group of people that attended the event, so there was no one that we can really say that we excluded. The call for RSVP was open to everyone, and indeed the young people did show up. The young people did give their voices, and what stood out for me, Nina, was that the room was not filled with what we call the youth elites. Rather, the room was filled with the marginalized, as I would say, young people, those voices that you do not hear on the everyday platforms, those voices that are not the Armandos, that are not the Lapakas, were in attendance. And they were the ones that took us by task and said that we need to work as a collective. And the atmosphere was just beautiful, and we had honest conversations. We were interrogating, and what stood out, Nina, was that we asked ourselves, what is youth participation in governance? Is youth participation in governance when Armando is addressing young people, when Lapaka is addressing young people, or is youth participation in governance when a young person in Oguriangava or in Oshakati can take their regional council to task?
Yes.
What is youth in governance?
What is youth participation in governance, Lapaka, in your own words?
In my own words, I would think that, Armando brilliantly summed that up. To say that youth participation is not me going to the poll and ending there. But youth participation in governance is showing up to the poll, holding my leaders accountable, and making sure that I critically analyze any and everything that my leader says. Armando said something very brilliant in the debate today, and somebody actually came there and they're like, it's true. Why is it that we leave important, quote-unquote, important decisions to our parliamentarians only? As a young person at home, I can criticize the budget and I can hold my national council member accountable to come back to me and tell them that, listen, this budget is not going to work for me. I think participation in governance transcends just the mere ballot. It is when you take up, we talked about conviction today in the room. It's when you sit down with yourself and you see what you're convicted to do in the country, to aid and contribute to the to governance structures within the country. We talked about democracy and how democracy also protects us as the minority in the country, for example. So when 10 people in the room are able to say that we don't, or we go for that, then and one person stands up and says that, no, I don't want that, those 10 people can look back and then ask, why do you say this? And then we come to a compromise situation where we then put it to a vote, and then when we put it to a vote, I can then
consent to the decision.
Consent to it and then accept the decision. And for me, that in turn would translate to governance.
Well, as much as young people would like to have access and to, have a seat at the table where decision making is made, there are systematic barriers to these. And did the debate address this, in terms of what hinders the youth of fully participating, whether lack access or, decision-making platforms, etc.?
Yes, indeed, Nina. And when we had that conversation, we actually, the room had that question, and we said, then what do we do when we are systematically excluded? And that is where the true debate came from, Nina. And then I, for one, said that then I am ready to be the sacrificial lamb. I'm ready to then be an unemployed youth. I'm ready to be an outcast in my own country in order to enable other young people to have a voice. And then that's where the conviction part came into the conversation. We said, what are you as a young person ready to sacrifice? And what is your conviction? What do you stand for? And what will you never move from? Are you ready to do for the greater good? Or are you ready to settle for what then pleases you? Are you ready to break the barrier, however it may be broken? Are you ready to confront it? And another thing that also came out was the accountability in governance. And we were saying that once we elect our national leaders into power, they rather opt to become accountable to the superiors in the party than rather to us, who are the constituents who have voted them into power. And that is where we were saying we need to break the silence. Young people in Namibia, from our assembly, we dissolved it. We need to learn to be audacious young people. It is time that we, after we said at the ballot that we are the biggest demographic, we need to now translate that in the everyday architecture of national governance, in the everyday political framework, landscape of our country. And that is what we dissolved to. And another thing, Nina, is that we as the UNAM Political Science Society, we are still anticipating our political week, which will be coming up, where we will be breaking down every topic. Today we covered democracy and governance together, but these are two different things that work together. Democracy there to protect the will of the majority, but also there to protect the minority. Governance, the everyday bureaucratic framework or the architecture of a country. We need to interrogate all of those and say, what is the role that the young people play? So through the UNAM UNAM Political Week, we will be coming up with a UNAM Political Science youth position paper, which will then lay our framework to youth participation as far as the university level is to the question.
Awesome. Lapaka, I also want to know, were there any successful case studies, perhaps, or models that you included within this topic of, youth's participation in governance, whether it's a national or global case study?
Yes, of course we did. But also I just wanted to add to the system part. There was... I think it's worth noting that today we put a name to the system. We now call it wait for your turn politics. And the youth in the room said that, no, we're not going to wait anymore. The model that we put in place was not necessarily, globally, but it was more locally and personal to us, where we had an icebreaker activity where we asked everybody to go around the room for 5 minutes and discuss what their vision is for Namibia. I, for example, led the dialogue and said that my vision for Namibia is to have a national development plan that is inclusive of GBV across every sector. And the answers that came from there was brilliant, because a young gentleman actually stood up and said that, I want a government that actually puts the interest of the people first.
Before policy.
Before policy, so that the policies can reflect the interest of the people. It was a bar. It was a bar. Yes, I think that model in itself, I think, was really inspirational, because now as a society, we also have homework to go back, because a lot of people also gave us their visions for the society. And now even like Mr. Armando said here, for the politics weeks, when we have a diplomatic day, we can actually put some of these visions down, jot them down, so that the leaders that we are going to invite can actually address these visions and make sure that the wish list of our society members is not just in 2030, but that everybody can also benefit from the cake come 2026.
So the debate was really just an entree to what's expected to come with the political week. So talk to us about what's going to be transpiring there. You said you're going to take every topic, break it down. How are the young people going to be involved? Armando, talk to us about the plans for that.
Yes, Nina, as a political science society that ought to be diverse, we for one, as an executive committee, are cutting the notion of the elitist youth of Namibia. With the UNAM Political Science Week, we are talking about a collective youth approach. And this serves as an invitation to young students of political science out there to say that, come on board, bring your ideas on how we can walk around this Political Science Week. We do not yet have a blueprint on what we are expecting, because we are political science, a society. We need to consult, democracy, participation, and then that will inform our concept note on the event. But what we can anticipate is fresh minds, unknown voices, trailblazing, every Namibian youth an opportunity to air their sentiments on what Namibia's policies ought to look like, what Namibia's governance ought to look like. There are disheartening stories about Namibia's governance. I have my own stories of how politics failed me, how governance failed me. So do other young people also, to share stories, but also to, as a collective, lay the architecture to then draft our position on how we ought to be audacious young people. Aya Shebi once, when she was in Namibia, who then was the African Youth Envoy, said that African youth are now audacious. Our leaders need to know that they have messed with the wrong generation. So that UNAM Political Science Week will then lay the landscape to saying that Namibian youth, or as far as Namibian political science youth are to the question, is Namibian political scientists ought not to be played with.
Lapaka, just in closing, your final remarks?
I think, first of all, I need to look to the camera again. Mr. Armando gave a beautiful trailer as to what to expect for the Political Science Week. We are looking to really evoke political consciousness amongst not just university students, but also youth and elders at large. We want to build a Namibia where the discipline of politics is not just, something that is on the side and something that I can do as extra, but it's actually the discipline that really affects everything in our society. And once you put somebody in that position that is actually politically literate, it can inspire change. So if there's any sponsor out there,
Come on board.
come on board. We are opening our hands now.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, all the best, and thank you so much for being here with us today. And I hope we can catch up with you when the week does kick off eventually.
Devin, maybe we can have you there.
Yes, thank you ever so much for having us, Nina. It's always a pleasure.
All right. Well, when we come back after this brief break, our conversations do continue, so stay with us.